Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, Thursday, February 29th. I think we call this a leap day. Only happens, I believe, every 4 years. We get this extra day in February, and we're going to make the most of it as Ryan Corazza of Inside the Hall is back on Podcast on the Brink. How you doing this morning, Ryan?
I'm good. Not only is it leap day, it's almost leaped off of the season here. There's only a few games left, so kind of crazy. I feel like the end of the season here kind of just has been going by pretty quick, despite some fans, I'm sure, feeling like it's dragging on forever based on the performance. But yeah.
So I just kind of a reset of where Indiana is at this point. Obviously, for those of you that follow the team, you're familiar with the record, but the Hoosiers are 15-13, 7-10 in the Big Ten. Snapped their 4-game losing streak on Tuesday night with a win against Wisconsin at Assembly Hall. Indiana right now at number 100 in Ken Palm and 105 in the net. Obviously, the NCAA tournament is a long shot for the Hoosiers at this point, unless they were to likely win the Big Ten tournament. They're going to be an NIT team at best, and at this point, likely not an NIT team. So their season, barring a turnaround here at the end, could very well come to a conclusion at the Big Ten tournament next month in Minneapolis. But Ryan, I want to start with the Wisconsin game. Obviously, Indiana snaps a 4-game losing streak, a lot of negative commentary, feelings, everything around the program entering that game. But the Hoosiers, for one night at least, figure out a way to get enough stops down the stretch, make enough plays. Obviously, it helped that they played so well offensively in the first half in particular. But what were your main takeaways from Indiana being able to maybe block some of that exterior noise and commentary around the program and be able to come together for one night and get a win on Tuesday night against the Badgers?
Yeah, so I think as we've seen in the Woodson era, when the best player or the star has a big game, that's usually helpful. And Ware was outstanding, and it's interesting too, because I feel like often in his tenure as well, sometimes it's later in the season where guys are starting to get used potentially like a little bit differently. I think I remember back, I think it was the first year where all of a sudden later in the season, Xavier Johnson and Trace Jackson Davis kind of finally synced up well and ball screen and pick and roll action, and that really helped them have that run at the end of the season to barely squeak into the tournament. And I feel like both with the game at Penn State over the weekend and then this Wisconsin game, you're seeing Kel'el Ware drive off the perimeter all of a sudden now. It's kind of Euro stepping in and getting those baskets. And I think as Trey Galloway has also, I know he's out of position and we want to say this and that, but the fact that he has gotten 12 assists now in 2 games this year, I think I saw that stat yesterday on X where it's only like him and Isaiah Thomas have done that in the program, or 12 assists that close in a row or something like that.
He's actually 6th right now in the Big Ten in assist rate, among individual players, which that's really good. That's a really solid number.
It is. And I think when he gets the right matchups, he can be very effective in that role. And I think Wisconsin is a team that isn't going to overwhelm him as much defensively, so he's able to really shine. So I think those two things on offense certainly were big. Secondarily, though, I do think, 3 throws were still, the percentage wasn't great. I think they were at like 65-66% at 10 of 15, but they did make 6 threes on a good percentage. And as much as people are lamenting Woodson continually saying, "Oh, we just got to make the shots. If we shot better," but there is some truth to that. And I think there were times in that game the other night where Wisconsin would come down and hit a 3, Indiana would answer back. I think Mbako did that at one point, and they were able to sort of run with another team that was going on a run or that was scoring at a pretty high level in a way that in other games when they've tried to respond, those shots haven't fallen or they haven't had somebody going well enough to be able to maintain. And then, we've seen it other times this season defensively too. It wasn't the greatest defensive performance. I think Wisconsin was like 1.1 something points per possession, but they made some of those tiny little hustle plays as well down the stretch with the Galloway box out with that ball going into the corner off of that missed shot that went out of bounds. It was Zayu's ball. Anthony Leal had that great block out as well for Renew to get a board down the stretch there too. So you kind of add all that together, and it was as complete a performance as you can get, I think, out of this group, which led to the victory.
Yeah, I thought it was also impressive that after they gave up that, I think it was 15-point lead in the first half, we saw in earlier games, maybe at home, particularly the Northwestern game, where I think they built a double figure lead 3 different times in the first half of that game, and ultimately gave it up each time, and Northwestern kind of controlled the game throughout the second half. This game was different in that I know Indiana did give up the lead in the second half, but it never felt like they lost control or lost touch with Wisconsin. I think that's a big thing for this team, to be able to just, not let the opponent overwhelm them and take a run and just bury them. And that, to me, is a little bit of growth for this team, because we've seen so many times where when they do have, that 10 or 12 minute stretch of really good play, and then they kind of fall back to some bad habits and the other team just takes control, and then Indiana really can't recover or get off the mat when the other team throws a punch. So I thought that was impressive. You talked about the defense being better. Obviously the points per possession are not great, but when you compare it with what happened the first matchup in Madison, I believe Wisconsin scored something like 1.4 points per possession. Still, I think the worst defensive performance of the season for Indiana. I thought they did a much better job making Wisconsin shooters uncomfortable. Max Klesmit, in particular, was really good in the first game up in Madison. Indiana really didn't let him get any rhythm. So I thought all of those things were positives in the win. I want to talk a little bit more about Khalil Ware and just his growth and development this season. You mentioned him being able now to maybe put the ball on the floor and get to the rim. I've just been so impressed with how, I don't want to say aggressive, but much more assertive it feels like he's become as the season has gone along, especially when he gets on one of those runs like that he got in the first half against Wisconsin, where there was a couple of times it was like, he took a couple shots that he made that was like, give me the ball, I'm going to go get a bucket. And even I think the first shot he missed was I want to say that on the broadcast they called it like a heat check, but I think he's become more of a focal point offensively, and I think that demonstrates a little bit of the growth in his game. Last season at Oregon, he was more of an afterthought and a guy that really wasn't as assertive offensively. And I'm not saying he's, a go-to guy. You just give him the ball and get out of the way at times, like what it was at times last year with Trace Jackson Davis. But I think he's shown tremendous growth with just his offensive skill set, the variety in ways he scores the ball. I mean, I know he's not necessarily the most comfortable player with the back to the basket, but he can catch lobs. He can shoot from the mid range. He can shoot the 3 ball. Now he can go off the dribble. I think his offensive skill set as the season has gone along has really improved.
Yeah, I think he's one of those rare talents too, where obviously he's been putting up numbers all season. But I did feel like this stretch during the losing streak and even kind of the back half of Big Ten play here, there still seems like there is like more he could be doing, and maybe it's more of like really putting a stamp on a game and really, really forcing another team into like disadvantages all the time and just being dominant, absolutely dominant. Yep. And I think that again, he was in some foul trouble against Penn State, but in this game against Wisconsin, that was not the case. And I really think he was just they had no answer for him. I mean, their front line just could not handle him. But that, to your point, I think that was coupled with an aggressive and an assertiveness that, like, kind of get me the ball. Yeah, there were a couple of heat check shots and he dropped those in. And so I think that's what separated him in this Wisconsin game too, is that whatever, he could have still had a great game and his numbers would have looked great, but there was a kind of a next level unlocking. And some of it I think is I'm just facing up more, right? I noted those 2 drives off the perimeter, but also there was Um, Within that, he was not getting guarded up high on the top of the key, and he just shot the three, right? And so yeah, it was kind of a full range of stuff. I even think there was one play too where he's not really much of a back to the basket in the post, but I'm pretty sure very early in the game, I think he backed down and scored as
Mm-hmm.
well. So yeah, he scored in a whole bunch of ways, and it was a yeah, I think Harvard, he had a crazy line, but in terms of higher level opponent, this is probably his most wow factor game of the season.
Yeah, and there was some obviously guys who covered the NBA draft that made note of it immediately afterward on Twitter. It certainly seems like he's trending towards being a first round pick in next June's draft, which is great for him after the season that he had at Oregon, coming into college, being ranked a top 10 player in the country, and then kind of slipping and having a chance to maybe rewrite his story this season in Bloomington. It's been a lot of fun to watch his development and his improvement. Two guys in the game against Wisconsin that maybe weren't on the positive side of things. Malik Renew, who continues to get into foul trouble, and Ryan, we talked before the season. I think I wrote it multiple times early in the season or before the season when it's kind of talking about keys to the season or things that Renew really needed to improve. Last season, he was just unplayable at times because of his high foul rate. Obviously, some of his playing time was blocked by better options in front of him in the front court with Trace Jackson Davis. But I know Mike Woodson would have liked to play him more last season, but he simply couldn't stay on the floor due to foul issues. And early in the season, it seemed like he had made some adjustments there and had gotten better at avoiding fouls. But these last, I don't have the schedule right in front of me, but in these last 7 or 8 games, I want to say he's continuously found himself in foul trouble. And it's not that he's just getting, taken to the basket or bullied in the post and having to commit fouls. He's committing a lot of these fouls where he's either out of position or just reaching needlessly. And I know it's been something that he's worked on, but it doesn't seem like at this point there's really an answer from him to right the ship on this. What have you seen? I know you watched the film quite a bit from each game. Is this just a symptom of Renew playing out of position at the four and having to guard on the perimeter, or is this just some undisciplined decision making by him? Because a lot of these fouls are coming, far away from the basket or in spots where he really doesn't need to commit a foul.
Definitely just being undisciplined. It's kind of crazy because this has not been an issue for him all season. I think the narrative was, all right, he's a sophomore year now, he's matured. This is no longer part of his game. But yeah, these last several games, it's all stuff that is avoidable. A lot of just reaching in, a lot of just silly stuff. So I do feel like that fifth foul, I don't know if you need to get in the whole thing with that fifth foul, but I think the bench was asking to foul. So that one maybe wasn't quite on him. Although if he had 5 fouls, he shouldn't have fouled. But yeah, it's been kind of weird. And I think to me, it's also affecting him just mentally and emotionally. I think you kind of see him, especially after he got that fifth foul. I think he was very kind of emotional and animated about it and trying to say, hey, you guys you told me to foul. And so it does seem to be affecting his game in the sense that he can't have that flow if he keeps getting pulled out. Now, all that said, I particularly felt like in the second half of that game, he did get that bucket, I think, to put Indiana up 72-70. But for a team that sometimes struggles to have good ball movement, better spacing, when he's also in there with where I felt like in the second half, when they would go to him or get the ball, he just becomes a black hole, and they're totally fine with him going 3-on-1. And I just think where going to the basket and getting a lob is a better look than that. And everyone then just kind of stands around and while that's happening. I mean, it's crazy if you just do like a freeze frame on Renew's post touches. Other defenders, the other team, like they go down and they guard him, and there can sometimes be like 3 Hoosiers on the perimeter that are wide open for threes. And I don't think they're expecting the ball, and he's certainly not looking to pass most of the time. And, I just don't think that that's the best basketball. And so with him actually spending more time on the bench in that second half, I think it allowed them to just go to the strengths of that game, which was Galloway creating and Ware often being the recipient of that creation.
Yeah, I wonder too if I know he's played a ton of minutes this season. I wonder how much of this is just him still kind of getting a feel for things. But you're right. When you do go back and watch the plays slowed down, excuse me, a lot of times he tries to force things that simply aren't there. And his pass, when he does pass out of a double or triple team, it's not it's not happening quickly enough to where you can create a disadvantage. It's almost like he holds on to the ball too long, and then the defense either ties him up, he's forced into a bad pass, or he's so far away from where he needs to be on the court that even if he is able to get the ball out, it's like a desperation play where Indiana's not able to take advantage of it offensively. And I think it's something that he's really got to work on, because in the future, obviously we don't know what the roster is going to look like, but if Indiana's going to try to become more of a shooting team from the perimeter, and they're going to have guys out there in the future that can make threes, when the ball goes in the post and you have a double team, you got to know where you're going with the ball to create an advantage and make teams pay for the double team. Right now, there's not, part of it's Indiana doesn't have the floor spacing, and so there's not all that much of a risk for teams to bring that heat to the post. But in the future, if Indiana's able to Liam McNeely, other guys that potentially added to the roster, if Indiana's able to get the ball back out to the perimeter and get a good shot, he's got to be much more efficient in terms of getting the ball to shooters. The other guy I want to talk about, because obviously he made his return in this game, scored 5 points, made a 3-pointer, made a nice long two. Xavier Johnson, those were the positives. I thought he did some good things, but obviously the 5 turnovers and kind of the same thing I'm talking about with Renew here. And obviously he's been out for some time, but this is not anything new with Xavier Johnson. There was at least 2 plays that I remember. There could have been more where he just forced a pass that wasn't there. And it's frustrating to watch, I know, for the fan base. And there was a lot of criticism on social media, immediately after when he came in the game. I remember, I think the first play he came in, he had a turnover. And I kind of, the bigger picture conversation that, I just wanted to ask you about is Mike Woodson's talked all season about how things would be different, if Xavier Johnson had been available. But then you watch a game like the other night where he was basically benched on the stretch and they played really well and won the game without him. How much of a difference in your eyes would a healthy Xavier Johnson have made in the overall trajectory of Indiana's season? Is this being talked up more by Mike Woodson than it should be, or is there a legitimate case that the Hoosiers would have been significantly better had he been available all season?
Well, there's a lot to this. I think
take your time. We've got no time limits here. Go ahead.
Well, clearly, if you actually look at the evidence of game, I mean, there was a time this season when he was benched and Gabe Cupp started over him. There's the time when he was ejected from a game for punching a guy in the balls. That happened this season. I think so. It's interesting though, because I think if you take the Woodson comments at face value and you've watched the team this season, you don't buy that at all. I mean, after the game, he was saying, he goes to bed every night, wondering what it would have been like if they had Xavier Johnson. Okay. Well, if you look at it from maybe his perspective or whatever, is he saying these things to try to get Johnson back to where he was or not bury him, right? And it may not align with what followers of the team want to hear or the real reality, but maybe it's being said for an audience of one potentially, or right. So that could be the case there, but I don't think taking those at face value, it really matches. That said, I don't think there is anyone that follows this team that before the season thought this is how it would go for Xavier Johnson, because the reality is when he play, and I know he's coming off an injury, but when he's in the game, he's not the lead ball handler anymore. I think, and the reality is when you watch how, especially, I did it for film session today, you look at some of the decisions that Galloway was making with some of those stagger screens later in the game, and just the way that, and Galloway has not been perfect, obviously. And again, you can say it sort of blue in the face that this isn't really the position he should be playing. But to me, Woodson has a lot more trust in what Galloway is doing in terms of not making as many. He may not be as athletic. He might not be as quick twitch. He might not come to this position naturally. But I think at this point, he definitely trusts Galloway more to play that role. And so, again, if he's talking, Woodson's sitting up in front of a microphone saying, oh, what it could have been or whatever. Well, now that he's back, and again, I know it's only one game and we'll see as things progress a little bit here, but he certainly has at times in Woodson's eyes when he has been playing and healthy has been the third option behind the Cups and behind Galloway. So yeah, it doesn't really light up for me, but at the same time, maybe there is a method to the what he is specifically saying that we might not be accounting for potentially.
So the last time you were on the podcast, I think was 4 weeks ago. A lot has changed in that time. There's been obviously this losing streak. There's been talk about Mike Woodson's job security. There's been obviously a lot of, we see it in the Inside the Hall community. You and I are in there every day. You don't post much in there, but I know you read it. I know you read the comments on Inside the Hall. I know you read the comments on Instagram. I read the comments on Facebook because I do a lot running that page. And we're not on this week's podcast to talk about how the Wisconsin win, as good as it was, changed anything in terms of the discourse of this team. Obviously, fans of Indiana basketball want the team to win. They're happy when the team wins. But they also can see the bigger picture of kind of where the program is right now. I mentioned at the top of the show, 100 in Ken Palm, not anywhere close to being a tournament team. And I think a lot of these questions are a little bit surprising to us when we look at where this team was projected to be in the preseason, what the talent level of this team is. And obviously the roster we've talked ad nauseum about it. I'm not going to go over the roster construction problems. Everyone that follows the team, follows the program, knows what the issues and the deficiencies are with the team. But it's become this bigger conversation just in terms of Indiana basketball, whether or not there's a decision to be made this offseason in terms of Mike Woodson's job security. And when you look at this kind of rationally in terms of what's been done historically in college basketball, you wouldn't hear conversation regarding a coach's job status, particularly after 2 straight NCAA tournament appearances when the coach is only in year 3 of his tenure. So I'm curious for your thoughts on why maybe, and I think you've got a pretty good perspective on this because obviously you wrote for the IDS going back to the Kelvin Sampson days, and you've been doing Inside the Hall with me since 2007. So we've seen coaching changes. We've seen when the fan base gets to the point where things, as I like to say, are basically unsalvageable, where the fan base is just done. I'm just curious why you think we've gotten to this point now in this particular season. Is it the fact that Mike Woodson has this team kind of so far maybe off of where people had projected in the preseason? Is it the fact that there's the transfer portal and there's an opportunity, if you get things right, you can really turn a program around quickly, and people don't see that happening with them? It's just to be at this point in year 3 of a coach's tenure after 2 straight tournament appearances. I don't think we've seen this before, and I'm curious just kind of why you think we've got to this point so quickly.
Well, some of it has to do with the way, we all communicate now, right? And I think online things get very flattened and become very binary. And it's like, he should be fired. No, he shouldn't be fired, right? And there's not a lot of room for nuance. And if you try to bring that in, these none of these platforms are incentivized for nuance. They're incentivized for sort of, quick hot takes and not really discussion that's going to lead anywhere productive at times. I think that is part of it. And we can see that playing out in real time. I do think beyond that these specific issues with the team this season also are almost a carbon copy of what we saw during Archie Miller's tenure, where people feel it's too post heavy from, Jawan Morgan handing that off to TJD, not good enough guard play, not enough shooting, both from the, 3-point line and from the free throw line. And then also, I think both came in. Archie Miller, first year, the defense was very good. Mike Woodson's first year, the defense was very good. Then both head coaches had their defenses fall off more as their tenure went along. So I think there's sort of this pent up almost 7, and look, there's some nuance. I know last year their 3-point percentage was good. The volume was low. So I think it's like a 7-year almost stretch here now of the same type of stuff happening that's sort of capping their ceiling that people are pretty frustrated with. And then I think the third thing is I guess a third and a fourth. Third is the way that he has communicated this, I think, has really kind of ticked people off. I don't think that, again, it's like, what do you expect him to say? Is he just going to be like, I don't think we have the guys this year. Sorry. Or.
Well, he kind of said that after the Purdue game in West Lafayette. He said, we're going to need to add some pieces, but the season's not over. He said that.
He did, which it's kind of a Mike Woodson slip there. I'm not sure he should have been saying that publicly, but so I think the way that he is sort of not communicated things. I know after the Penn State loss, he sort of said he put it on Mike Woodson, but then out of the other side of his mouth on Monday night and his radio show, he reiterated that he takes the blame, but then is like, I'm not the one missing the shots. So, it kind of goes back to that refrain he's been saying all year. So I think that has just like annoyed people. The way that he's not been as fully accountable as maybe some had hopes. And then stylistically, I think honestly is really the crux of this, because there seems to just be an aversion to some of the simple advanced stats math stuff that he doesn't seem to take into consideration. And if that is, that's not everything, obviously, but foundationally, scheme wise, I think if people are looking even in the the quote unquote success of last year and the year before, this stuff was there. It just was papered over a little bit because the team performed better, and Trace Jackson Davis was just an outstanding player. So that sort of is like the undercurrent of all this too. But at the same time, this is only like potentially a portal season away from fixing. And so yeah, I think if you zoom out and you said the day Mike Woodson was hired, to any, I don't know if fans really are, it's not always a rational group, but if you said Mike Woodson in his first 3 years is going to make the tournament twice, he's going to tie for second one of those years in the league, and he's going to get a 4 seed, I don't think anyone would be calling for his head, but recency bias plays into some of this. And I just think also the amount of talent that's on this team and the way that they just haven't been able to scheme effectively with it has just really kind of soured people on the season. And that it should not be this bad, I think, is really kind of the thesis of a lot of this, and a lot of the frustration, and a lot of slings and arrows that have been sort of shot at Woodson. And I don't know, that's kind of it. I mean, we could add some more here, but I think those are kind of all of everything that's in the stew that gets us at this point that when you maybe take a couple more steps back, wouldn't really think that it should be the case. And this is also, I mean, I guess to wrap this up, this is also like the IU fan base, right? They're everywhere. You see all these NBA guys talking about, oh, Miller Kopp in the G League, he's running into all these fans. Jawan Morgan was just on a player pod. I think it was like Theo Pinson's pod or somebody like that, talking about that. And they are very engaged. quote unquote very knowledgeable, I guess. But at the end of the day, if all that gets shifted into a negative fashion or against you, it can be hard to come back, and it can sort of just compound on itself to a point that you almost feel compelled, if you're the powers that be, to make a move because it is so ugly.
Right. So that was going to be what I asked you next, is just from a administration standpoint, and we have no idea what conversations are going on behind the scenes, if this is even being talked about. How does Indiana decide the best path forward? Because I feel like there's downsides to any move that's made. If obviously the rest of the season has to play out, you have to let the games, we'll see. You have to see where the final record ends up. But you've also got the fact that the portal opens the Monday after Selection Sunday, so I feel like you have to have a firm idea of what you're going to do and be swift with your decision. If you're going to move on, you have to make the decision, and you have to have. I think if you're going to do something after 3 seasons, you better have a firm idea of who your next coach is going to be before you make that move. You don't want to just fire a coach and then not have a plan for who the replacement's going to be. That would be a complete disaster. But on the flip side of that, if you decide like, all right, this is going to go on for another year, these are the reasons why, I feel like you also have to come out, and if you're Scott Dolson or Mike Woodson or whoever needs to have the conversation, at least tell the public like what the plan is for moving forward. This is why we feel this way. This is what we're going to do to address the issues. If you just say nothing and just have business as usual, I think it just makes the kind of toxicity around the program even worse. So I'm curious just how you think. I don't want to put you on the spot and say like what you think should happen, because obviously, that I don't necessarily think that's productive, or what our opinion is specifically isn't all that important in the grand scheme of things, because we're not making the decision. But do you agree that Indiana needs to be decisive here in these next couple of weeks and what they're going to do, and come out with a firm plan? Because if Mike Woodson's going to be retained, there's a ton of work to do in the portal, and Indiana is going to have to really hit a home run to make next season a success. Otherwise, we'll be right back in the same position 12 months from now.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. Winning cures all at the end of the day, and I know that they don't have much of a runway left. There's 3 games and the Big Ten tournament, and work to do for the NIT. I'm not sure I've been looking at any bubble watches for the NIT, but so yeah, I think to your point, this is not being decisive and all these sorts of things that go along with it. It's not an easy decision to make, but I do think that if they got this win here, I'm not sure there's anything really, it's funny that I talked about this being so, that online kind of makes it binary, but it's like, yeah, you have to be decisive. And if you're going to go forward with Woodson, I know that there were years when Fred Glass would come out and sort of make a statement, right? That the year that they didn't even make the end, I think there was like what was that other tournament they got invited to, that like the CIT or the CBA,
CBI.
CBI. And he came out and made a statement like, we're not going, we're Indiana. We have higher aspirations. We're not going to play in this. Right. And so maybe almost sort of what has been missing, and what we're trying to get at here is, and I'm sort of hemming and hawing to answer this, is that there hasn't been sort of that statement that sort of gives answers the question of sort of what's going on here, or kind of readdresses like, this is it. This is what we're looking for going forward. This is what has to change, or like, this season was a disappointment, but I've talked with Coach Woodson. I think there is sort of there's almost been like a communication gap. I think some people have felt like because of what is Woodson saying publicly hasn't really matched what's been going on. And so there is sort of like this void in terms of kind of people stepping in and being you know, almost kind of piling on the negativity. And I even feel like in a losing streak with recency bias, it's very easy to do that too, where again, one win doesn't cure all, but I think it can help bandage up some things as well. So I don't know. I think you're right that there needs to be some sort of you need to be decisive, but I also think it's kind of a careful what you wish for. And for as much as people are frustrated and may not like the scheme, etc., I think really one bad year out of 3 years, despite maybe some foundational stuff that could certainly be a little bit more modern, does feel pretty rash, and that might not. Where do you go to next unless you already have that lined up, right? And I'm not sure that right now to do it after 3 years after one bad year. I mean, you look at, Mike, this is something I saw Mike DeCourcy bring up this week. You look at Arkansas this year. You look at their Ken Bombs, they're in the 20s. They've done well. They're below IU. They're 124th. They're 500. I don't know the Arkansas chatter, but I'm sure that people aren't looking for Musselman. No one's calling Musselman a bad coach or for them to move on from him. So like, I don't know.
You know what the scary part about that is, though? His team was basically built entirely from the portal this offseason.
Yeah. And you know what? Some teams that have been built from the portal have done really well in the tournament too. So and that's kind of the whole thing with this too, is that ultimately all of this is sort of a roll of the dice because of the way that these teams are structured out. And, you and I have talked about this, off the pod, that to me, the strategy for both recruiting out of the portal and from the high school realm has been sort of big names or bust. And to me, in some sense, they're missing like replacement level players, to steal like a baseball term here, in some of these positions. And I mean, I don't know what they will do this season, but I do feel like if they were just to target a good mid-major player who could, some of these guards that have beaten them are those types of guys in the Big Ten.
Ryan Langborg.
Yeah.
From Northwestern.
I don't know where Baldwin played before.
He was at VCU, but he came with Rhodes from VCU.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he was A-10 player of the year, A-10 defensive player of the year.
That's true. Okay. That's a little bit of a different
There's other
case.
examples. I mean, the Damas kid from Southern Illinois went to Illinois. Another Southern Illinois kid, Lance Jones, went to Purdue and is starting. The Ben Cricky kid was at Valpo and is now at Iowa. Not saying he's a great player, but I agree with you that there's good players everywhere, and you can't be so enamored with the status of a player in their ranking. I think that's kind of, you talked about the points earlier about people being frustrated. I think another great example of just kind of a mistake that was made, and maybe we should have called it out more as it was transpiring and as we watched it happen, was like the portal ads that they had last offseason based on the roster that they had. I understand taking Khalil Ware. He's a great player. You don't say no to him. But looking at like Anthony Walker and Peyton Sparks, realistically, they needed like wings and another guard that can shoot, and they just loaded up more to the front court. And now you look at the season, it's like, all right, you don't have enough guards. You're playing Gabe Cupps too many minutes. Well, Woodson says Johnson's hurt. Well, you're sitting there with an empty scholarship spot, and Ja'Kai Newton's been hurt all season, which is something you definitely knew about before he even got to IU. That to me is kind of the puzzling thing in terms of just this whole roster thing. And that is, I think, also leading to some angst among the fan base when you look ahead to the portal. It's like, okay, Indiana has this great NIL. They should be able to get some guys from the portal. Are they going to get the right guys from the portal? And that kind of speaks to your point. You don't have to just go out and try to get the best guys in terms of what they're ranking on these lists from portal ads. Go find the guys that can fit into what you want to do. And this kind of goes into maybe another whole conversation that we could probably spend a whole podcast on. What is in Indiana's identity? What's the system they want to run long term? Find guys that fit whatever that is and put a team together that way. And the last point I'm going to make on this is in terms of communication. The reason I think it's so important is if Indiana is going to bring Mike Woodson back for a fourth season, and we have no reason to believe that's not going to be the case at this point in time, you have to at least try to set him up for success. So come out with a statement and sell why that is and what is being done to address these issues and why it's going to get better. Otherwise, you're just setting someone up to not being able to be successful in the portal, and you're setting yourself up for a season next year realistically that could even be worse if the talent level is on the decline. So a lot obviously to unpack there, but that's kind of where I'm at on it. Final thoughts, Ryan?
No, I think you're right that it goes back to a couple questions ago you asked in terms of, what they may do or whatever, that there does need to be it's almost like there is a board of trustees, but it's sort of like he's the CEO, Mike, if we look at Mike Woodson as the CEO, like give a vote of confidence here from the board,
right?
That and come out with something that's like for your shareholders that are going to want to continually invest in the business. And right now, that hasn't happened. And look, Dolson, I think, we see what he did on the football side of things. That maybe wasn't quite as expected, and that doesn't mean that like I'm sitting here saying that he's going to move on from Mike Woodson, but I think he has shown that, and football is a different beast because they're trying to get into, enough of the upper crust where all the money is now and where that's all gone. That's kind of a whole separate thing. But ultimately, traditionally, and, he knows it better than anyone because he's been in it a long time and was part of the program as a student, that it's Indiana basketball. And if you're in that seat and you are at these games and you're hearing the booing and all of that, there does need to be a statement that speaks to all of that and what is going to be done, or else there's that void, and what that void gets filled with is sort of all the online negativity that we're seeing, and that doesn't serve anybody well, honestly.
Yeah, we know he's hearing it because people have posted on message boards, that people have posted on our community emails that they've sent to him, and they've gotten responses. And I'm sure his email box has been full up. And I'm not saying that like he's done anything wrong at this point in time by not saying anything. Like, you don't come out in the middle of a season and start talking about that. Like, this isn't the time for it. I'm just saying at some point, sooner rather than later, after the season's over and Indiana's played their last game, there needs to be, and it doesn't need to be like a cookie cutter statement of like Mike Woodson made the tournament his first two seasons. While we, are disappointed with the reasons that season 3 didn't go well, we are confident that season 4 is going to be better, and we support Mike and moving forward. That can't be it, because people want to hear like the vision in terms of what is going to get better and what's being done. And I mean, obviously they could just do that, but I think that's like a huge miscalculation and mistake, because the Indiana fan base, like the reason that we have this podcast, the reason that Inside the Hall exists, the reason that all these other websites and media outlets cover the program is because of the fans. The fans have supported this program unconditionally for a long time. Indiana has not had top 5 results in a long time, but the fan support has been top 5 throughout that whole time. And I think you owe it to those people that have invested their money, their time, their energy in following the program, to give them, an explanation on what is going to be done. Either way, if you're going to move off Mike Woodson, you better have a good plan for what you're going to do next. And if you're going to retain him, explain the reasons why it's going to get better. Otherwise, what are we even doing here? That I'll leave it with that. Right? I mean, right or wrong?
No, I think that's true. And, ultimately, I've said this at other times on the podcast, just with Woodson, sort of like his his sort of I don't know, his hubris or just him kind of being unmovable and stuff. I
Right.
wonder again if here's a plan going forward, like what what macro is really going to change with him as a coach and his style and such. But at the same time, I do think a lot of what he did early on was short term. He could have come in the first year and Trace Jackson Davis is like, I'm kind of looking to go into the draft. And, Mike Woodson might say, okay, well, good luck. I'll make some calls for you or whatever. But he really tried to get a lot of those players back instead of maybe bottoming out for a year, but saying, here's my system. Here's what I'm trying to run. Here are the players that I'm trying to get. And it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy now, because with TJD gone, he talks so much about, I've never had to build around a big guy, but that's what they did again this year. So, what is it? Did you just randomly accumulate talent again, sort of, and with getting, Ware and, having Renew, who also fell a little bit more into their lap after he decommitted from Florida? Or is it that just has happened and that going forward, you're still trying to locate some other type of players and that just hasn't happened the first couple of years, but that's what you're looking to do long term? And again, it's just hard to know based on what he said publicly, not matching up with what's on the court and what's matching up with what all the numbers say and about how this team plays stylistically and also how you watch them play. So it is a bit of a disconnect at times with that. And that sort of goes back to what we're saying, leading with the frustration and looking for someone of leadership there to be a little bit, I guess maybe the term we're kind of dancing around not saying is like, yeah, just something more direct about what this all is. And I think this year it's been a little bit cloudy on a number of levels, and that has added to the frustration from people.
Right. And I think just with just the messaging, it shouldn't be panicked, but there should be some urgency in terms of, like, the portal has changed college basketball. This portal opens, there's a chance that your players are going to leave. So you got to make sure the ones you want for the future, you're recruiting them now to keep them. And you also are going to have to make the program attractive enough to where you can get the guys that can actually help you turn this around in the program. And that's kind of what I'm saying in terms of making it attractive for guys to come here. You have to if you're going to, whatever you do, whatever decision you make, you have to make the program as attractive as possible. And the messaging around things is very important in that. And like I said, I don't think anything should be said at this point because it doesn't do anybody any good to make a comment one way or the other. But I think you said it right. There's a communication gap at this point. And I think for the most part, fans, as passionate as they are, if you reason with them and give them a thorough explanation on where things are and where things are going, most of them will at least hear you out and give you a fair shot. And I think that's the best place we can leave this week's show. Obviously, Ryan, there's less than 3 weeks till the portal opens. The season for Indiana, probably, a couple weeks to go. I think hypothetically they could be playing 2 days or 2 weeks from today in the Big Ten tournament in Minneapolis. If they play on the Wednesday, it would be 13 days. So things are going to happen fast here. And obviously we're going to have it all covered for you on Inside the Hall and Podcast on the Brink. Ryan, always good to have you on the show. We've done it more frequently this season on Podcast on the Brink, and it's been a lot of fun talking to you.
Hey, likewise, good to hash it all out.
Absolutely. If you enjoy Podcast on the Brink, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review, or 5-star rating, and a review over on Apple Podcasts. You can also leave us a 5-star rating over on Spotify. It helps us, continue to grow the show, helps in the algorithm. If somebody searches for IU basketball podcast, the more ratings and reviews that we have helps us show up closer to the top of those results. So we really appreciate it. It doesn't take a lot of time. If you would consider doing that for us. And we'll be back, obviously, next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.